So as a private pilot with no IFR certification, making go and no-go decisions based on weather was pretty straightforward. If weather was below VFR, we simply just didn't go. As a private pilot with an instrument rating, things get a little bit more complicated. You can potentially fly with a visibility less than 3 miles and ceiling lower than 1,000 feet. The question is, should you? And that's a good, fair question to be asked. In this section of the Instrument Pilot Ground School, we're going to focus on aeronautical decision making. Remembering just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. Your instrument rating is intended to make you a safer pilot, not a reckless one. So let's dive into this lesson and I'll see you all in the next video. So if you've been with M0A since your private pilot certificate, you learned about the value of setting personal minimums, writing down your personal minimums, and of course, holding to them. Earning an instrument rating gives you a new skill to manage the risk and weather, and it will encourage you to also adjust your personal minimums. I encourage you to establish your personal minimums and hold to them here. Here's how I do it. I will not go flying if the ceiling is lower than blank. I will not go flying if the visibility is less than, you fill in the blank. I will not go fly if the winds are stronger than blank. Hold fast to your personal minimums. Sometimes, honestly, and I'm speaking from experience, that's hard to do. We pilots don't like to disappoint. Let's say you're going to a flight with a friend who is in from out of town. You promised them you'd go flying that day, or you're trying to get an appointment, whatever it is, you're supposed to be flying your boss to an important meeting, whatever it may be. It may take 1 hour to fly to the destination, 2 hours to drive there if we have to. Making a go or no-go decision so you have plenty of time to drive. So if it's an hour to fly, 2 hours to drive, make sure I make the go or no-go decision when driving is still an option. Sure, I know you want to get there quickly, but remember the safe pilot motto. It's better to be late than referred to as the late, right? I don't like talking about aircraft accidents, but we can certainly learn from them. I think we're doing the pilots involved in those accidents a disservice if we don't talk about it here. Aircraft accidents are very rarely caused by one single thing. Rather, they're usually caused by a chain of events that lead to the accident. If you can break a link in the chain, just one link, the accident does not happen. We're going to take a look at an accident report compiled by the NTSB, and it's the job of the NTSB to investigate accidents with an eye toward making transportation safer. The accident we're going to look at happened in 2006. The accident pilot had an instrument rating and was flying a Cirrus SR-22 at night in IFR conditions. Now, the Cirrus SR-22 is a very advanced aircraft and an excellent instrument platform. Most people also know the Cirrus because of the CAPS system, Cirrus Airframe Parachute System, is what CAPS stands for. So Cirrus has a built-in parachute. If the pilot runs into trouble, the pilot pulls on a T-handle, it's literally up on the ceiling, on the roof, and deploys the parachute, and the entire airplane kind of just floats down to the ground. The accident pilot was attempting to fly from Arizona to her home in Las Vegas. She held an instrument rating and was periodically in phone contact with her husband at various points throughout the flight. The flight took place on a moonless night in the winter. During the pilot's initial flight home, she encountered weather and decided to land at a kind of an intermediate airport. While on the ground, she was in communication with her spouse, who was providing her with weather updates from the local area's flight service station. Diverting because of the weather is a smart move. Had she stayed on the ground, we wouldn't be talking about, there would be no story to even talk about. It's a little curious to me that her spouse was providing weather updates from a flight service station. The question begs, could she not access this information on her own? Did she have a working cell phone? She was talking to him, but was there service? Why was she going through her spouse to get the information? So she's in contact with the spouse though, and then after some discussion, they both decide that she should stay the night at the diversion airport and he would drive out to pick her up. About an hour later, she and her husband then decide that it'd be okay for her to continue her flight home if she took an alternate route that would take her south away from the encroaching weather. When she found better weather in the southerly direction, she would then continue her flight to the west to her intended destination. The pilot reported to her husband that she would file a flight plan in the air. However, there was no record of a flight plan ever being filed. Her husband called the FAA when the pilot did not arrive at her destination airport. Search and rescue personnel located the wreckage 5 days after the accident in a mountainous canyon area. The airplane came to rest on the side of a canyon wall orientated in an uphill direction after it had clipped several trees. The accident site was about 200 feet below a mesa at an elevation of 4,600 feet MSL. Investigators located all the major components of the airplane and noted that the caps, that's that parachute built in the airplane, had deployed, but deployed due to impact forces and was lying next to the airplane in a debris field. That means the parachute was not deployed intentionally by the pilot. Now, the airframe and engine inspections revealed no mechanical problems that would have precluded normal operations. There was no radio communication received by any air traffic control facilities from the pilot during the accident flight. The weather in the area at the time of the accident showed the cloud bases were near 6,000 feet, with the cloud tops at 15,000 feet. Visibility, it was between 0 miles in the clouds and 3 miles below the clouds, with a freezing level at 6,500 feet. Another pilot flying northeast of the accident site reported moderate rime and mixed icing conditions from 8,500 to 16,000 feet. Recorded weather briefing between the FAA Flight Service Station and the pilot's spouse indicating that he received all the pertinent weather information for the flight. The spouse relayed that he told her there were no significant buildups for the flight to the southeast. An in-flight weather advisory for an AirMet Zulu, that's icing, update by the National Weather Service for the time of the accident reported moderate icing between 9 and 18,000 feet, with a freezing level forecast between 4 and 8,000 feet. The NTSB determined the probable cause of the accident was the pilot's failure to maintain terrain clearance during cruise flight while flying at night at an altitude to remain clear of the clouds and icing conditions. Contributing to the accident were inadequate weather evaluation, the clouds, icing conditions, and the dark night light conditions. What bothers me the most about, finding this and this inadequate weather evaluation is the report indicates she received all the weather information. It was just relayed by her husband. However, things can get lost in translation. As a kid, you ever play the game telephone where you tell someone something and all the way down the line they repeat it? What happens by the end? The last kid in school that said that, it wasn't even the same message. The words have been so corrupted and changed, it's not even the same anymore. You can't help but wonder if that was the case here. Did something get lost in translation? This is 2006. If the woman is in contact with her husband, she must have had access to a telephone, a cell phone, even a pay phone when she was on the ground. Why didn't she get her own weather? Diverting because of weather was a smart decision. Now, what happened to make her decide to press on when they both made the decision earlier to stay on the ground? You may find yourself in the same situation someday. Someone has to come get you. You feel bad about making that person drive several hours out of their way, only to find yourself spend the night in the airplane or a lonely airport because there aren't any hotels nearby. It's not fun. Trust me, I've slept in a Cessna 172 before. It's not very comfy at all here. Now, as the pilot in command, though, it's up to you to check the weather, cross-check the weather, and then go with your gut. If you don't feel comfortable about any aspect of the flight, don't go. Don't let peer pressure, or worse yet, that cousin get their itis, force you into making a bad decision. Decision making is one of the most difficult things to teach students. So I will devote an entire lesson to it. And I'll see you all in the next video. Keeping proficient and keeping current are two very different things, especially when it comes to your instrument flying skills. As a student pilot, you learn that you have to do 3 takeoffs and landings in a 90-day period to keep current, take passengers. If you're flying at night or in a tailwheel airplane, those have to be done to a full stop. You also do your flight review every 24 calendar months. To maintain IFR currency, in addition to all those tasks required for VFR currency, the 3 takeoffs and landings, flight review, within all these things, you must add flying 6 instrument approaches, practicing holding procedures and tasks, and intercepting and tracking courses through the use of navigation electronic systems. So 6 instrument approaches. However, currency, that's instrument current, is the bare minimum required by the FAA. Currency is not proficiency. We'd all like to fly every day, but most of us can't. The offices of M0A, right, are located at the airport. And we still can't fly every single day, but we work on integrating aviation into our everyday lives and our work to enhance our proficiency. Proficiency happens over time, and you must make a commitment to set aside time in your busy life with the goal of achieving and maintaining IFR proficiency. Again, these are Jason's tips on maintaining IFR proficiency. Add to them whatever you wish. These are not FAA tips, these are Jason tips. Aim to fly at least once a month and practice those instrument skills. Now, I don't mean wait for IFR days. Go out on a VFR day and take a pilot that's a instrument-rated friend or even just a private pilot to be a safety pilot with you. By the way, when I say fly once a month, I want you flying more than that, but true dedicated instrument flying at least once a month. Have a friend work as that safety pilot. Do some turns, some climbs, descents, shoot an approach or two, all under the hood. Track radials to a VOR. Practice copying those clearances. If you can't get out to the airport on a regular basis, invest in a flight simulator. Use that simulator to practice your scan and departures and approaches. Put yourself in weather that would challenge you, real world, and work on improving your skills. If you are tech savvy, you can actually hook up your iPad to your flight simulator and get some pretty realistic approaches and procedures on in. You don't need anything fancy. X-plane and a yoke and some pedals, and you're there, honestly. I'll stand by this. Flight sim does make you a better instrument pilot because you practice your scan, and since the simulator doesn't move, it's your scan, right? It's the kinesthetic sense that tells you if the airplane's entering into unusual attitude or not. You're using your eyes to actually see that instead. For an extra challenge, pull up an approach you've never flown before. Practice sight reading it. That's, sight reading, like what you do in music to read sheet music. Sight read an instrument approach instead. Now, sure, you'd prefer to fly approaches that you know and everything else, but sometimes you're just thrown into it. You're assigned an approach you've never done before. Sight read on a simulator can give you the confidence and the skill in the real world if you had to do it. Now, if you have access to an airplane or a simulator, you can still keep your head in the game with all that we do with our webinars as well. I want you there in those afternoon webinars. Participate if you have access to those as well. What else can we do though? Out at the airport. What about AOPA events, EAA, IMC clubs? There's other aviation organizations that have events and seminars. There's local FAA fast team events that you can get to and attend. Lastly, chair fly. This means looking through the departures, approaches on your tablet or a hard copy, mentally flying them step by step. Take yourself anywhere in the airport, wherever you need to go. Some pilots go as far as to take a picture of their panel they usually fly. Turn it into the wallpaper on your computer or on your phone. That way, every time you pick up your phone or whatever, it's there. You see it over and over. It becomes second nature to you. Make it the wallpaper on your desktop as well, so you're living your instrument panel. You must make a commitment to proficiency, especially when weather gets in the way. Like if you're in any part of the world that has winters. Florida, not so much, but winters can ground you for weeks at a time. That's when you're heading down to fly the flight simulator and chair fly when you're grounded. Make a plan and find a plan that works for you and do your best to stick with it. IFR skills are perishable. Use them or you will lose them. There's a big reason we say a good pilot is always learning. To excel at anything, you need to keep your skills fresh. So take this advice to heart and plan on being that good pilot who is always learning. It's a big reason why we're so proud of you all in the M0A family, the M0A nation, and the learning community we've built, the ground school members who support each other I see it all the time in the Facebook group, in our own little communities as well during the webinars. And I look forward to seeing you as well participate in all those extensions of the ground school, especially even in our alumni Facebook group after you've gone on and earned all your certificates and ratings as well. Just send in a support ticket. Myself and the team, we are truly here to serve you all and help you on that mission of no longer just being a current pilot, but proficient and eventually pursuing aviation mastery. I'll see you all in the next video. So we just spoke about personal minimums, setting them, adjusting them, and you're always encouraged to raise your personal minimums when the weather is a little more challenging than you're used to, or lower when it's VFR and it's better, right? Or what about when we're flying with passengers? I'm going to now ask you to carefully adjust your personal minimums when you're IFR with passengers on board. Think about it. You're already going to be task saturated. Flying because, you got to fly the airplane, you got to handle the radio calls, you got to stay ahead of the airplane, stay ahead of those procedures. You definitely don't want to add passengers asking questions in the mix here. Here is another Jason-ism for you. I never take people into IFR conditions if they're new to flying or have never been in a small airplane before. Small airplanes honestly can be intimidating, scary for some. Instrument flying can be spooky because there's no horizon outside, I can't see the ground. They can get airsick much easier with things like spatial disorientation and vertigo setting in for our passengers. I only want to take passengers that are IFR themselves, preferably, or studying to be an instrument pilot in real IFR conditions, because it's so easy to scare someone who isn't familiar with IFR flying. Another plus of that, by the way, is they can be an asset in the cockpit, a little crew resource management. Even if they're working on their instrument, like yourself, I'd still love to fly with you. You could work the radios, we could work the GPS together, whatever it takes. I guarantee pretty much every flight school has a story about a CFI who, desperate for hours, took a potential client up on a marginal VFR day and the weather deteriorated. The CFI wasn't comfortable with the weather and it was probably terrifying for the potential client. I know in one situation where a CFI allegedly turned to the client and said, "You better make peace with your God," as they were being bounced around in the clouds. This was on a discovery flight, by the way. That client never came back or was ever introduced to aviation in a proper manner again. I know this because I bought that client's Bose A20 headset from him after a hefty investment on his part from that. Don't destroy a dream. Don't be that CFI when you go to become a CFI. Don't be that person who introduces someone to aviation in that environment. Here's your homework now. Carefully modify your personal minimums before taking passengers up on IFR days. Be careful whom you put into the cockpit with you when the workload goes up in the IFR environment as well. Aeronautical decision making. This is one of those skills that you developed and created and cultivated way back as a student pilot. You honed it as a private pilot. Now you need to really sharpen it as an instrument pilot. There are certain acronyms the FAA would like you to know that address aeronautical decision making, so you must be ready to recall these on your check ride and on your knowledge test. So this will be heavy note taking, heavy screenshots, however you've been taking your notes. Make sure you have these down. These should all be familiar to you, starting with the I'm safe checklist. The I is for illness. Am I suffering from any illness, be it a sinus or inner ear issue that should keep you on the ground? Is my stomach upset? Any illness that could be affecting my piloting skills that should keep me on the ground. That's what I'm talking about when I say illness. M is for medication. Have I taken any medications that may impact my mental or physical faculties? That includes over-the-counter as well as prescription medication. Chances are, if it says do not operate heavy machinery, it may cause drowsiness, these types of things. We're not flying. An airplane is certainly heavy machinery. Next is stress. Stress can get in the way in the cockpit. A little stress, like taking a check ride, can put you on your edge a little bit if you remember from private pilot. It can throw you off your game a little bit. Too much stress is an easy way to create a distraction or to forget things like using the checklist. A is for alcohol. 8 hours bottle to throttle, or even suffering from these effects. That means if you're hungover, we stay on the ground. F is for fatigue. If you're tired, physically or mentally, you have no business being in an airplane. Then there are 2 E's. The E says, from the FAA perspective, that it's for emotion. If you have an experience, an emotionally upsetting event, a demotion at work, a fight with your spouse or boss, anything that be a distraction. I often lump those into stress in a way. So I add the other E, the one I use the most, is for eaten. Have I eaten anything? Am I properly nourished and hydrated? Dehydration, by the way, can be just as debilitating as ingesting alcohol. That's the I'm safe checklist. Now we're going to look at the PAVE checklist that takes ADM to the next level. The P is for pilot. Is the pilot able to pass the I'm safe checklist? Is the pilot current and proficient in the A, aircraft flown? Is the aircraft airworthy? Is the pilot familiar with the operating characteristics of that aircraft and its limitations? V is for environment. How is the weather? Is the aircraft equipped for the weather? How are you, the pilot, in that environment, geographically as well? And E is for external pressures. What is the purpose of this flight? Is it a high pressure flight you have to make? Is it a job interview? Right? All these sort of issues we might have to actually work through. Is it, I would say, the external pressure of when I became a commercial pilot of adding compensation, adding money to the equation made it quite difficult as well. The next ADM acronym we need to know is the DECIDE checklist. We must, the D, detect that a situation exists and that an action is necessary. Maybe you notice the head indicator is drifting off a heading, you didn't reset it, or is it failing? E, estimate. Estimate the significance of this action. What happens if we don't take action, if we don't reset the heading indicator? Choose. Choose a desirable outcome. I'd like the head indicator to match my magnetic compass. So I then identify the actions needed in order to achieve the chosen option, and then do. Do the action necessary to achieve the change. I'm going to reset my head indicator and note the time I did this. If I need to reset it again within 15 minutes, there's a good chance the heading indicator is failing. And then E, evaluate. Evaluate the effects of that action. The reset worked, but I'm going to keep an eye on it here. Now that flow chart, and this flow chart is a popular matrix that the FAA likes to use to break down the decision-making process. The pilot detects something that has changed and estimates the degree of the issue and makes that the risk, therefore, this is the way to fix it perhaps. Identify the actions that will improve the situations and mitigate the risk, do the action, and evaluate the need for more action. Notice that the pilot has come up with several actions here. And the pilot is looking at the aircraft as well as the environment and the external pressures like passengers. This is how PAVE and DECIDE and really I'm safe all work together here. You see, ADM is more than just acronyms. These all are things we do, but they all come here together here, and they all end up really working together. There's another one though I want to share. It's called the 3 Ps. The first is to perceive. Perceive, be it the hazard, is it a hostile hazard, such as a cloud ahead with virga coming down, which tells me there are strong downdrafts under that cloud. Virga, by the way, that's rain that doesn't actually reach the ground. It's an indicator of violent downdrafts. I then process to evaluate the level of risk. Do I want to fly under a cloud with virga beneath it? Probably not. I can perform some risk management, which we should divert around that cloud. Perform is the last. Single pilot operations are perhaps some of the most challenging, especially when you add passengers to the mix. Single pilot IFR can be what we would call task saturating, especially with needy passengers, navigational equipment issues, everything else. It all adds to that. So we want to plan. What is the plan for the flight? What is the alternate plan if the original plan cannot be carried out? How about the plane? Is the plane equipped for this mission? How about the pilot? Does the pilot have the training, experience, currency, proficiency, mastery to do this flight? What about my passengers? Can the passengers help with the flight, or are they just high maintenance? What about the programming? Are you familiar with the avionics? Is the database current? Are you proficient or a master of these avionics? These acronyms, I know we went through them quickly though, they're designed to help you mitigate the risks for each flight. Ask yourself, how risky is this, right? This is all, by the way, from Chapter 2 of the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. It gives kind of color-coded representation of the risk. How much sleep did I get last night? Did you have a long day? Is it a day or a night flight? How's the weather en route? at the destination? Are you the pilot feeling rushed to get off the ground? Do you have current charts? Have you done a weight and balance? Have you calculated performance? Have you briefed your passengers? If it's not a complex flight, then we're good to go. If there are areas of caution, we must use our personal minimums and most importantly, stick with them. I know we talked about all these acronyms quickly, but none of them, with the exception of the P's of single pilot resource management in the IFR environment, should be new to you. Go back, write those down, add them, and start quizzing yourself on them. You'll see them as well in the flashcards as well, but you need to know and fully understand them. So there's an old adage, with more privileges come more responsibility. That's especially true for us instrument pilots. An IFR rating gives you the option of flying in weather, but you need to ask yourself, is it a good idea for me to go flying in that weather today? Am I feeling well enough to do this flight? What will I do if the weather turns into something that pushes my personal minimums? What will I do if I encounter unforecast weather? Do I have options? This is our review. Let's start with the I'm safe checklist. I is for illness. Am I feeling under the weather? Am I coming down with something? Am I getting over something that could distract me in the cockpit? Medication is our M. Am I taking anything that could impact my flying, over the counter or prescription? S is stress. Am I stressed out? Did I have a fight with a spouse? Am I worried about my job? Don't take off, the answer is yes. A is for alcohol. Have I had any in the last 8 hours? Am I suffering from the effects of alcohol? F is fatigue. Am I tired? Should I really want to go out and shoot all these approaches in hard IFR conditions after 8 hours of work? I'd be too tired. E is for emotion. Now this can tie back to stress, and if you're emotionally upset, we stay on the ground. Again, I shared earlier, I put emotion and stress together here. I use the E for eaten, as in have I eaten anything? Personally for myself, like they say, I'm not me when I'm hungry, right? So I add it to the I'm safe checklist. You want to make sure your body is properly fueled before the flight, and that includes hydration. Now, once the I'm safe checklist is addressed, we move into risk management. And we do that with the PAVE model, sometimes called the PAVE checklist. The P is for the pilot. As the pilot in command, am I instrument current? Am I instrument proficient? Is the weather within my personal minimums? A is for airplane. Is the airplane airworthy for the IFR flight? Am I, the pilot, comfortable in that airplane in IFR conditions? Do I really know how to work the radios, the GPS? Am I relying on the technology to make up for my poor flying skills, perhaps? We take the V from the word environment. How is the weather? Is it stable or is it unstable? Is the weather getting better or worse? Am I comfortable flying in the clouds? Am I comfortable in the environment geographically? And finally, external pressures, sometimes called expectations. Am I being pressured to make this flight? Do I have some place to be? Can't stress this enough now. If it is a new to you airplane, or even just new make or model you've not flown in a long time, or it's a different geographic area you're not familiar with, or you have non-flying passengers, you raise your personal minimums. Finally, to recap, we have the DECIDE model. The DECIDE model is sort of like a flow chart that we go through to make decisions. It begins with detect. Detect there's a change, an issue, something that needs to be addressed. For example, it appears the weather is getting worse. Maybe the visibility is going down faster than you actually thought it would. E is for estimate. Estimate the need to make a change. Should I continue this flight, or should I head to the nearest suitable airport? Should I turn around? We then choose the outcome we would like. I'd really like to avoid potentially nasty weather. So identify the actions that would allow me to achieve this outcome here. If I turn around and head back to the airport, I can land, I can always reschedule my flight for another day. Then we do the action that will help you achieve the outcome you desire. I decided to turn away from the weather, and then finally I'll evaluate the need to make further changes. It's still getting worse, so I think the prudent thing to do here is to cancel a trip, go back and land and just fly another day. As your experience increases in flying, so does your confidence. So we have to be careful that we don't get overconfident as we start boring holes in the clouds, because overconfidence can lead to hazardous attitudes. Let's review some of those hazardous attitudes and their antidotes. There are 5 hazardous attitudes recognized by the FAA, beginning with macho. These are the pilots who do silly things, foolish things like scud running, buzzing the tower. The antidote is taking chances is foolish. You usually tell a macho pilot their sentences start with things like, watch this. Next is invulnerability. That is thinking that accidents and FAA violations, they happen to other pilots. That doesn't happen to me. This can go hand in hand with macho. The antidote is it could happen to you. Next is impulsivity. The impulsive pilot acts before thinking. The engine coughs in cruise flight and the pilot panics and pulls the nose up abruptly. Well, the correct thing to do is to get to best glide speed, right? You should think first is the antidote. Next is resignation. Many CFIs will say this is actually the most concerning hazardous attitude to see because the pilot just gives up flying the airplane. This is very incorrect. The flight isn't over until you're back at the hangar here. You can do something about the situation is the antidote. And finally, anti-authority. These are the pilots who continue to descend below weather minimums when they can't see the airport at all, or the pilot who flies IFR without an IFR rating or an IFR flight plan. Remember, accidents and incidents can happen to any pilot. And usually it's not just one bad decision that leads to an accident. It's a chain of poor decisions. Hone your decision-making skills to break that chain, and I'll see you all in some upcoming videos.